Okay, so in this part we're going to discuss event handlers in JavaScript, and by the end of this video you'll be able to create event handlers for almost any event and be able to run a block of code based on that event. And what we'll also do is look at the three different methods we can use to actually set events using JavaScript or directly from the DOM, or in fact even from an HTML attribute, which we don't recommend but we'll look at anyway. Sometimes it's necessary, but we'll get into that in just a moment. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an element on the page which will allow us to click, say, an anchor. So we'll create a link on a page which will allow us to click that, and we'll look at the three different methods of implementing it, and then we'll also examine some of the cross-browser compatibility issues you might face when you're creating event handlers. So let's go ahead over to our code and we'll create an element on the page, and this is just going to be a basic anchor, and it's just going to say click me. So we'll set the href to hash. We don't really need to do anything with this. We'll just be logging to the console when we actually click on this element, and for the ID let's go ahead and just choose link. Okay, so let's take a look at this on the page and see what it looks like. Okay, so we've just got a click me link here. When I click it, nothing happens. We're just going to attach some kind of JavaScript to this to actually go ahead and build up the functionality. Now let's take a look at the first way that we can create a method, an on-click method, or any other method for that fact, but in this case we'll just be looking at on-click. Now you've got a variety of different methods that you can use. So for example, let's just go over to our console and check out what kind of event handlers we can actually use on this. So we'll go ahead and we will say document.getElement by ID link dot in fact let's do that var element. Okay, so now what we can do is we can use element to say dot on something. So we've got things like on click, on abort, which is not useful here. On, let's see, what have we got that's useful for a anchor? On key up, which is you can apply to anything really. On focus, which we could have in this case, that's just if we were to tab down to it, so we can create an event handler based on that. The on mouse enter, on mouse leave, on mouse up, which will be a mouse click up, on scroll. So some of these don't apply to anchors, but we can see there's loads of event handlers we can use, and you can get these just by looking at the element you've created on a page in exactly the same way I've just done. But what we're going to be doing here is examining three of them, and we'll just look at on click, because some of these event handlers apply to things like form field elements and things like that. So the first one that we're going to look at is the HTML event handler, and this is just going to be bound using an attribute, and the attribute in this case is going to be on click, no spaces, all lowercase. So in this case what I'm going to do is just put some code into this element's value, and that's going to be the JavaScript code that's going to be run on that specific event. Now just before we do anything here, this is not recommended, so if you're going to stop watching the video at this point, please note that the next two methods we're going to talk about are much more appropriate. There obviously are some times when you're going to have to include an inline event handler, just very slight rare cases you'll have to do so. But generally if you can, you're going to want to go ahead and build the functionality at the bottom of your page in an external JavaScript file. In this case we're doing it on page, but that's just so we can see easily. But this method is definitely not recommended to use all the time. So I'm just going to console log clicked, and we'll go ahead and look at what this does. So let's head over to our browser and refresh, click me, and you see that we console log clicked. So that was fairly straightforward. We just have on click and then this. So for example, let's just go ahead and look at the list of other methods we could get. So element equals, so var element equals document dot get element by ID, and let's choose the item link, sorry. Okay, so element.on, let's go ahead and pick say on mouse enter. So let's go ahead and do this one. So inside of our code, let's just get rid of that. Inside of our code, let's say on mouse enter. So let's take a look at what this will do. So when I refresh and hover over, you can see that on entering that element, it's console logging clicked, and you can see the number next to it incrementing for each event. So play around with some of these event handlers, but we're absolutely not going to use these HTML inline event handlers. We're going to focus on doing everything just in JavaScript and not worrying about doing these inline. Not good practice at all. So the other way to do things is, we've already sort of seen how we can do this through what I've been doing in the console. We can go ahead and create an element variable, or any variable, and we're going to go ahead and say document dot get element by ID. Now I'm going to use get element by ID just because it's quick, but if you want to use query selector or query select all to select one or multiple elements, then you can do so as well. You don't need to use get element ID to access these on click properties or anything like that. So you don't need to do that, or methods rather. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to say element.onClick. So I'm setting this as a function or a method, and then within here I'm going to go ahead and say console.log clicked. So what's going to happen now is I'm registering an event handler here. I'm saying element.onClick equals function. This function is going to be called when the onClick event is run or fired. So now when I click me, it says clicked. I can click that as many times as I want, and it just outputs clicked. So that's the other way of doing things as well. And again, we can do things like on mouse enter here. You saw the list of event handlers in the console earlier, so this is doing exactly the same thing as what we were looking at inline. So the next one is slightly tricky, and just because of cross-browser compatibility issues. By the way, this event handler is basically accessing the DOM, whereas when we look at the next one, this is going to be purely in JavaScript, and this is using the add event listener method on the element itself. So element dot add event listener is a method on the element that we've used to get by ID, and this is inherited again, and we can now access this. Now this is going to take two properties that we require. One is the event, and notice I've not used on click, I've just used click here, and then the second is a callback. So we have a callback here, closure, and then we can say console log clicked. So this is going to do exactly the same thing as we've already seen, except we're doing this using JavaScript and not via the DOM. So when I click this, it just says clicked, and I can again click that as many times as I want. And again, mouse enter. I'm going to go ahead and refresh. It does exactly the same thing. So we can use all these events, in exactly the same way. Now the problem with this is that this doesn't actually work in Internet Explorer. So I happen to have an Internet Explorer window open with this file running. Now when I go ahead and refresh the page, which I've just done now, you see that the script has paused at a certain point, and we've actually got an error returned here. Now it's important to know that if you go under here, I'm using document mode 7, so this is simulating the version of Internet Explorer 7, and you'll see here that under the console it says object doesn't support property or method add event listener. Now that's strange because we didn't get that error in Chrome, but actually what's happening here is that this isn't supported in the Internet Explorer 7's JavaScript engine. So the version doesn't contain this method, and that's a bit of a problem because now our script dies here and we can't actually do anything. So there is a solution to this, and this is to use the attach event method. Now the only problem here is that if I go ahead and modify the code, so let's go ahead and do this again. So in fact, let's comment this out just so it's there so we can reference it. Okay, so what I'm now going to do is I'm going to say element dot attach event, and it works in exactly the same way, except I have to say on and then the event name, and I still have a callback function, so it's very similar, and I'm going to console log clicked. So this is going to now work in Internet Explorer. If I go ahead and refresh the page, okay, so where's the console gone? So we can see here that under IE7, we go ahead and refresh. Okay, so I've done a hard refresh on that. Our errors have gone. You can see that there's no errors in the console anymore. And now when I click this, it says clicked. So now let's hop back to Chrome and refresh, and you can now see that we've got the exact opposite problem. So we've now got uncaught type error, the object, i.e. this click me here, and let's just bring up the console here. The object here that we have selected using JavaScript has no method attach event. So we're now faced with the opposite problem, and this just won't work. So really, the best solution to this is to use a JavaScript library, one that's sort of like jQuery, that handles this all for you, and then you get the full, backwards compatibility. However, if you're not bothered about supporting IE7, doesn't really matter. You can just ignore it and use the add event listener method instead. So what we've done here is we've looked at the difference between this and let's say only works in I think it's IE8 and above. In actual fact, no, it's IE8 and below it doesn't work. So IE9 plus we can use IE8 minus we can use this. There we go, that makes a lot more sense. So it only works in IE versions lower than IE8. IE8 and lower. Okay, so this one will work in all. So we'll leave this here as it is. So we've basically looked at selecting an element and applying an on-click event handler, both HTML inline, we've used the DOM version, and we've also used the JavaScript method add event listener, and we've also considered the sort of backward compatibility of this, where in IE8 and below we have the alternative attach event method, which uses a slightly different implementation, so on click instead of just click, and it also obviously uses an entirely different method name. So you obviously can detect whether attach event and add event listener are available in that browser, and then choose which one you want to use. You could do this without JavaScript libraries, but it's certainly a lot easier, and if you do need the full flexibility, it might be better to use a JavaScript library or a really good solution that's been proven to be really effective in determining which one can be used. It's not difficult to do at all, but there we go. So we've examined event handlers and how to create event handlers here, and we've just looked at on click, but of course you could substitute these for any of the event handlers that are available.